Okay, we're live.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the February 2nd, 2026 meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the University. That's good. Of the Rhode Island Board of Trustees. The meeting is being held in person with committee members participating remotely. At this time, interim board secretary Emily DeMomondes will conduct a roll call of attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person when your name is called.
Okay, Vahid Onjazieri,
Present via WebEx.
Armin Sabatoni,
Present via WebEx.
Maria Ducharme,
Present via WebEx.
Michael Fascitelli, Joe Formicola,
Present via WebEx.
Courtney Nicolato, Christine Bovey,
Present via WebEx.
and Mark Parlange.
Present on WebEx.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay, the chair will declare that we have a quorum at this time. And a reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion or second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on. As remote members and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and Niantic people. Moving forward, the first order of business is the approval of the minutes of October 27, 2025 from the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Do I hear that as a motion?
So moved, Joe Formicola.
Do I hear a second?
Second, Maria Ducharme.
All right, we heard a motion. A motion is on the floor to accept the minutes as presented. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. Discussion items. First discussion item is a review of the governor's FY 2027 recommended budget, which is in your enclosures. And Abby Benson, Vice President, Administration and Finance. Abby, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone stayed warm this weekend.
Yep.
So the governor released his FY27 budget on January 15th, 2026, and I have a few slides that will walk through what came out in the release. So I hope, there we go. Just a reminder, the governor's recommended budget is really just the first step in the process. So this is what the governor recommends to the General Assembly, but there will be several months of negotiations and advocacy around the budget before a final appropriation, usually in June. So if we go to the first slide, well, the next slide. All right, so there's a lot of information here, but I just want to remind everyone how we set up our budget updates here for you. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see what our enacted general state appropriation was in FY25 and again in FY26. So last year it was 115.3 million. We're obviously very grateful to the governor and the General Assembly for that general state appropriation every year, which supports our operating budget. If you look down in the table, we put a request in and we have three categories of funding we're looking for. So if you're looking on the left-hand side, first, in the last couple of years, we've had an operating budget shortfall. So we've asked for support to offset that. We also asked for current service level, which is essentially the funding that we need to kind of keep the university operating, that takes into account increases in COLA, cost of living, contractual requirements, utilities, debt service, things like that. And then we also include a request for strategic initiatives. And if you look at the columns going to the right, you see an evolution of FY26, what we asked for in FY26 in those categories what we got in the governor's budget, what we received from the General Assembly in FY26, and then FY27 request, and then what we are seeing in the governor's recommended budget. So I'm going to focus on the last two columns. So for the FY27 request, we asked for support to offset our $3.8 million operating budget shortfall. The governor's recommended budget did not include any funding for that line item. We also asked for a $23.6 million increase for our current service level. The governor's recommended budget did include a $4.2 million increase, which we're grateful for. There's a little asterisk there because included in that is about $1.3 million that was included to represent increased funding or increased charges we're going to receive from the state for services they provide. So that includes the Rhode Island ERP and other IT charges. So if you think about that, kind of 1.3 million of that 4.2 is already spoken for because the state's going to charge us and we're going to have to pay them back. And then if you look at the request for strategic initiatives, we asked for $10.2 million. I'll walk through those later in the deck, and we received zero for that. So overall, we received a grand total of 4.2 million of our request of 37.6 million for our general appropriation. Any questions on that before I get into a little more detail?
No.
Hey, Abby, it's Courtney. A quick question. I know, having been on this committee now for a few years, the request for strategic initiatives specifically, I don't know if, have we ever seen any funding towards that? I don't recall that we have. Just curious.
Yeah, it's a good question. We did in FY24, we received some funding for faculty, specifically around Blue Economy faculty, but generally we have not received funding for the strategic initiatives. And the feedback we get is that the state appropriation is general, and so we can use the general appropriation any way we want to support those strategic initiatives. But as an institution, and you've seen this presentation several times, you'll know that our strategic initiatives are really aligned with our strategic plan and our priority areas. So we feel strongly that it's important to sort of highlight what our strategic investments would be if we got that additional funding. We have made some decisions within our state appropriation to fund some of those initiatives because they're very important, but we feel it's important to sort of line them out that these are our priorities in our strategic plan.
Got it. Helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Abby, am I right with my math though? We got about a 3.5% increase. So we're going to get 119.5 million to the operating budget.
That's what the governor's recommending. That's correct.
All right. Okay.
Next slide, please. And these are slides you've seen before, so I'm going to go quickly through them. I went through them in detail in the budget request in September. This is just a reminder that our current service level is made up of several categories. The largest one, of course, is cost of living and contractual increases for salaries. That's our largest expense item, so that makes sense that this would be our largest current service level requirement. But we also include student aid because we increase student aid every year. Fringe benefit impacts, utilities and insurance are increasing. We have debt service projected that we pay on our revenue bonds and some other items. We have a couple of new buildings coming online, Fine Arts Center and Ocean Robotics Lab, so we have operating expenses for those buildings. So that's the breakdown of the 23.6 million. Next slide, please. So to Courtney's question, these are our strategic initiatives. So they align with our strategic plan for priority pillars. The first is about faculty and support for our land grant match. We have a match required from the federal government to be a land grant university. The second is around student achievement, which is academic advisors. The third is around fostering an inclusive culture. So that would be support for our TD program, talent development, National Guard and tribal scholarships. And then the fourth is powering the University of the Future IT modernization. So you'll see what we requested in the second column, and you'll see that we did not receive any funding for that request in the last column.
And these specific requests, Abby, these have been pretty consistent, right? Since Focus URI was established.
That's correct. The numbers have changed slightly because, as I mentioned earlier, in some cases we have made a decision to reallocate funds to support some of these, but the general line items are exactly the same as they've been for the last 3 years.
Okay.
But Abby, it's Margot.
Yes.
We've moved, I think you just said this, but we've moved forward on these anyway. We're just in essence, we're probably not funding other things to try to fund these. Is that right?
Yeah, so some of them are new requests. For example, faculty, this would be a request for additional faculty advisors, academic advisors. So in some cases, we've moved forward in hiring new faculty and hiring new advisors, partially. The strategic priority 3 is actually helping to offset money that we already spend. For example, $1 million a year to support the talent development program operating costs. We already spend that every year because we have the program, but we would like the state to offset that because it really does impact the state more broadly. Same with National Guard and tribal scholarships. So we get some money from the state to support our National Guard waivers, but not at all the demand and the number of students that are using them. And then I would say strategic priority 4, the powering the university of the future. Some of this is for our ERP implementation, and we are using university reserves to do some of that, but we have some ongoing costs that will need to support our ERP for the next 10 years that we are looking to fund. And then we always have needs for audiovisual and Wi-Fi upgrades. IT is one of these areas that is just constantly needing modernization. So we make some investments there, but we're always seeking additional support.
All right, so Abby, let me ask another question about that. 3.8 million, that's what we were to the bad at the end of last year. Or was that just on the money that the
That's-
state gave us?
So the 3.8 is what we call our budgeted operating shortfall. So for FY27, if we look at FY27, at the budget that we would like to spend and the revenue we're anticipating receiving, we have a $3.8 million deficit.
So that's a projected shortfall.
That's the projected shortfall at the beginning of FY27. We're
Okay.
obviously tracking that every month to see where we are relative to it. So
All right. Do we have as of right now, do you know whether or not we had a shortfall in 2026?
mid-year projections are showing no, but that's really because we're, as many of you know, in a hiring freeze due to the FTE cap. And so a lot of our projected budget is salaries. And so we're not able to hire to meet many of those. But we're tracking it every month. It's mid-year, so we have, 6 more months to keep track of that.
All right, and I think you answered this. Even though we're asking for money for different strategic initiatives and other things, are we still doing some of those things based on the other money that we raise in tuition and fees?
Yes, that's essentially what I was saying, is that in some cases we have allocated funding because we know, we've asked for these for the last 3 years and we haven't received the full funding. So in some cases we've moved forward, but in other cases we haven't because we have, our operating budget is used for things that are happening every day. So we certainly can't fund all of the things in those items, but we've had to pick and choose what we view as high priority to reallocate within existing budget. So spending them on something else, and we take that money and spend it on some of these priorities.
All right, very good, thanks.
It's still, I just do want to emphasize, these represent critical needs for our operating budget. These are things that absolutely would support the university to be able to execute on our mission.
Okay,
Abby, it's a detail and not, I don't want to get too far down this road, but I'm curious if we pulled out like TD program, National Guard, tribal scholarship support, are there federal programs that support those efforts separately from the state? No.
No, and I know Dean Labuti's on, he could get into more detail on this, but essentially the federal support is more broadly, not for those narrow populations. So the National Guard is a state program, talent development is a URI program, and tribal scholarship is a URI program. So we obviously try to maximize as much as we can with federal aid to support our population, but we don't have access to programs that are that narrowly focused. And I would say right now, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, the federal aid landscape is very challenging. So there are a lot of changes happening on the federal side to support student aid, but also federal loans available.
Yeah, to say the least. Thank you.
Hey, Abby, what's in the 4.5 million for Powell University? We have a lot of money we spent on IT before. I remember we had Workday, the conversion. So what's that 4.5?
Yeah, I can follow up with a detailed analysis. Part of it is for 3 FTE ongoing to support our Workday program
Right.
office. So we've hired some people on limited term for implementation, but we want to keep that going. Part of it is for AV support and modernization for our classrooms. Part of it is just for general IT support, and part of it is for Wi-Fi upgrades. So we have to periodically upgrade all of our Wi-Fi points, and that gets to be quite expensive.
But don't we have to do that if the workday is getting implemented? Aren't we already starting that and embarking upon that?
Yeah, so we have hired these positions on a limited term basis using university reserves for implementation, so for 2 years. But we anticipate that that office will continue after implementation, so we're seeking ongoing support, perpetual funding for those FTE. Because right now, those FTE are slated to not be funded after implementation. But obviously, we need to manage the ERP going forward. Okay, next slide. Okay, RICAP. So RICAP, if you recall, is the pay-as-you-go funding we get to support capital improvements at the university. So we do have some really good news here. Asset protection is always our #1 request, which is what we use to do repairs and maintenance of our buildings. We asked for 17.3 in FY27. We only received 15.2%, but that is an increase over the FY26 enacted. We also, for the last 2 years, have asked for funding for campus access control. And it's 1.575 rounded here to 1.6 million. And that is essentially funding to help us determine a campus access control system of record that we can then install into our new buildings as they're built, and then work on a plan to retrofit our buildings. So this is essentially electronic access to buildings. Right now we use keys, and we don't have funding to either, we don't have funding to retrofit the whole campus, but we want to put an RFP out so that we can determine what we want our system of record to be, so it can be put in all of our new buildings. And this funding will help us with that design and getting that started. Right now we have 3 access control systems, 1 for housing and residential life, and then 2 others that are used in some of our buildings, but it's certainly not consistent, and some of the technology is not ideal. So we really want to be able to have electronic access to all of our buildings ultimately. So we actually did receive RICAP funding for that 1.6 million in the governor's budget request. And then you may recall last year we had put in a request for funding for campus accessibility projects and also funding for building envelopes. So those were for more lumpy projects like roof replacements, because we have about 15 roofs that need to be replaced. We did get funding last year for ADA and for building envelope, and they continued that funding this year and also sort of signaled that in the out years they may continue to give us that for ADA at the $1 million level a year, and then for building envelope at the $3 million level a year. So the 7 and 15 you see there were over 5 years, but we think that we will hopefully get a recurring appropriation for those line items in the out years. Any questions on that?
So totally, we got another 21 million in RICAP money.
Correct. These are highlights. I just want to say the next slide just talks about the fact that we have a number of ongoing RICAP projects that were funded as expected. So if we go to the next slide, we'll skip over the first bullet for a minute, which is an important bullet. But the second bullet talks about the fact that we had previously, the governor's budget and the General Assembly give us a 5-year vision for RICAP. So we previously had funding for RICAP to support the athletic complex renewal, the fine arts building, some academic fire protection projects, Narragansett Bay campus renewal, stormwater management, and PFAS. So those all came in as we expected, as they've been appropriated in prior years. So that's why they weren't on the prior slide, but that is obviously good news for us because that's critical funding for those projects. Then we did have funding for new projects that didn't receive any funding. These were also the Carruthers HVAC system. That's our library building. That was on the request last year and this year for 67.6 million. We did not get funding for that. We have a new project, which is to rebuild the Allen Harbor bulkhead and dock. Allen's Harbor is where we have our small boats up in North Kingstown, and the dock and bulkhead need to be replaced. And then we also envision a public safety building in the service sector part of campus. Right now, our public safety groups are spread out. We'd like to build a public safety building, so we have that on the RICAP request, but that did not receive any funding. So going back to the first bullet, it's important to note that our GO bond request this year was for an integrated health building, 165.7 million. We did get funding for the GO bond in the governor's request, but only at the $105 million level. So we will continue to advocate to increase that number to reach what we were hoping for, the 165.7, and simultaneously just be thinking about how we might adjust the building if we need to, depending on where the funding lands. Any questions on that? Okay, and then the last slide, I think the board is aware that we've been advocating increasing our FTE cap for, every year for a long time. The governor's budget actually recommended that URI not be subject to the cap, going back retroactively to July 1st, 2025. So that obviously would be an ideal outcome for us, but it has to be considered by the General Assembly. So that's also in the governor's budget.
Everybody on the board get that one? Any questions on that? Full-time employees, why we need to go through the state and why we're looking for an exemption? All right.
Yep.
That's gonna go in, it's in the governor's budget. It's also gonna go in as a separate line item in a separate piece of legislation.
Great.
This is Chris, can I, just a personal story about the FDA cap. We just lost our administrative assistant who retired. So now, we have faculty making their own copies, doing their own travel. It's just not a very efficient, use of our time if we're also expected to, do research and other things. So it is definitely needed to be able to hire someone new.
Yeah,
And I'm
absolutely.
happy to see some money for the maintenance in our chafee in the stairwell. Every time it rains, there's like a stream of water coming down. And so it's, it affects morale when your building it's raining in your building, that kind of thing. So
Well,
happy to see some money for that.
We hear you. That's why we're all over it. But say the same thing in the full meeting.
Yeah, this was a big deal. We won't go into too much detail on it, but we have a big budget, probably the biggest in the state. We're responsible with that budget, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to hold your hands behind your back while you're managing the budget. So hopefully we'll get relief on this because Chris, it's not only bad for morale for faculty, it's unacceptable for students. So, and we want faculty to be operating at its most effective way, and we want our buildings to be presentable. So all of this is important.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point.
Any other questions on the actually governor's proposed budget? All right, Abby, you want to start talking about tuition and mandatory fees for the FY 2027?
Yeah, absolutely. And while the slides get pulled up, I just want to acknowledge our AVP for Financial Strategy and Planning, John Pullman, is not here. He's out on paternity leave. He's a new father, but we do have Cheryl Hinkson and Kelly Slocum here from the Office of Financial Strategy and Planning that have been doing a great job in his absence supporting our budget development. So just as a reminder, we bring the budget to you all in September, which has enrollment assumptions and tuition and fee assumptions. And then we bring it back to you in February once we've reached our October census and we have a better sense of what's happening in the landscape with actual requests for approval of tuition and mandatory fees. So that's what we're doing here today. So there's a lot of slides here because I'm going through tuition and fees, and then I also want to introduce some new internal changes we made around differential charges in our URI online program. So I'm going to move through this quickly. I think the format of these slides should be familiar to you by now, but of course, please stop me at any point if you have any questions. So first slide, please. So total cost of attendance, this is something that's an important piece of information for our family. So the Board of Trustees is responsible for evaluating rates as they relate to a student's total cost of attendance. We'll go to the next slide, please. We define TCOA as tuition, mandatory fees, and standard housing and dining charges, which are those most likely to be selected for a given student. So you see here that what we call those standard housing and dining charges. And I just want to define this for you because obviously parents care about what they're paying for tuition and fees, but also if they're living on campus and have a dining plan, when you see our financial recommendations, you'll see total cost of attendance and differential there. So I just wanted to define it for you up front. So next, I'm going to talk about our housing and dining rates. These are not approved by the board. These are approved internally, mostly because housing and dining are auxiliary functions which have to be self-supporting. So we come up with housing and dining rates to match what we think our operations are going to require. If I could go to the next slide, please. So this year, we are proposing, and I don't know if Vice President for Student Affairs, Ellen Reynolds, is here, but I appreciate her and her staff for working on this budget as she oversees the auxiliary functions. Proposing an increase of 2.6% total for housing and dining charges this year. You'll see that the housing is proposed to go up 1.5% and dining up 4.5% for a total of 2.6% over FY26. As I'm sure you're aware, food prices continue to increase. We've seen that for the last couple of years, and it continues to be a challenge. So this is just for informational purposes that this is what we're proposing our fees to change for housing and dining in FY27. Next slide, please. So these are our mandatory fees, which are approved by the board. You'll see we have several of them, and I have the evolution from FY26 to FY27 request and revised. We are seeking increases to 4 student fees this year. The first is the Fascelli Wellness Center fee. We've asked for this in the past, an increase of $8, and partially is because that facility is so heavily used that it requires regular upgrades to equipment and maintenance of the facility. So that's the purpose behind the increase in the fee there. The second is the Memorial Union fee. We're requesting an $8 increase, 1.7%. And that is because, as I think you know, we are hoping to embark very soon on the Memorial Union renovation, but we have to do sort of renovations in the meantime. So we've renovated the Ramsden, and there are other areas of the MU that need to be kept up while we work on the broader renovation, and that fee is what supports that work. The third fee is the building fee, which supports the Ryan Center. So as previously reported to the board, the Ryan Center is facing a real challenge. It was built in 2022, and it's a beautiful facility, but it requires a lot of capital upkeep, and operating expenses aren't sufficient to really drive up and be able to support the capital investments. So we're proposing a phased approach where we increase the building fee $30 this year. And I anticipate proposing another increase next year so we can offset some of those capital expenses. For example, it needs a new roof, it needs a new Wi-Fi system, it needs fire door replacements, elevator replacements, etc. And then finally, the technology fee. As I mentioned earlier, technology is something we're always looking to support. The technology fee is split several ways at the university. Some of it goes, about half of it is used to support our journal subscriptions through the library so that our faculty and students have access to that information. Those subscriptions are increasing significantly this year. And then it also goes to support our IT department, and then also classroom modernization. So based on what we're anticipating for FY27, we're seeking an increase in technology fee for $22, so a 6% increase. So overall, just given the differential in sizes of those fees, it's an overall increase of 2.9% for the total mandatory fees for the year. Any questions on that? Okay, so the next slide is an evolution of our enrollment. So this is always a busy slide. I just want to point out a couple of things. We can go to the next slide, please. This is really focused on undergraduates. So I have undergraduate full-time enrollment target evolution. So I think some key takeaways here are that if you look at the left to right, so you've got our 26 budget allocation, you've got where we actually were on October 15th, our actual enrollments, and then the difference between those two. And then what we came to you with in September for FY27 budget request, and then what we're requesting now. So just a couple of key takeaways. I think you all know that we were successful in increasing our enrollment numbers last year, which was really critical because we didn't meet our numbers the year before because of FAFSA and other things. Most of our increase were out-of-state students. We continue to see some decrease in our targets on in-state students because of other competing programs. But if you look at our target for this year, it's actually slightly above where our target was last year, but not a big increase because last year was a catch-up year. We had to increase our numbers, but now we have to deal with issues like housing. We can't grow a lot next year because we still have constraints there. So the target is for the total is less than what our targets were last year, but that's because we had such a big swing and increase last year to make up for the year before. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is for our transfers. It's a similar story, although we don't have as big swings. We continue to be really successful with transfers, but we expect a similar trend of last year. So our target is actually very similar to where we were last year. We're not seeking a big increase in transfers from last year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is just a reminder. So the two slides I looked at before were really about first year. Obviously, we do a lot of planning around first year, our incoming class, but these are the assumptions that were built into the budget that we presented in September for our total student population. So on the left, you have undergraduate full-time. By residency on the right, you have graduate full-time. And then below, you have what our tuition rates were. So we assumed a 3% tuition increase for the budget request that was submitted to the state and that you saw in September. And just a reminder, last year, the board approved a 3.5% across the board tuition increase. So this is more of a reference slide for our.
Any distinction
Yes.
between a regional student and an out-of-state student?
So regional students, and Dean can get into more detail, but essentially we have regional students that can come to URI through interstate agreements for programs that they don't have in their own state.
So that means, do they pay in-state tuition then?
That's actually a good, I don't know the answer. I should know the answer to that, Mike, and I don't know the answer to that.
Abby, I can add that.
Yeah,
Good morning,
Dean.
everyone.
Is Dean here?
Yep, New England Regional. So it's the New England Regional Program. It's agreements that we have through New England states that don't offer that program, and there's reciprocity, and they pay 175% of the in-state tuition rate.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Dean. I did have that word somewhere in my brain, but I just wasn't able to retrieve it. So I appreciate you answering that question. Any other questions on this slide? Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. All right, before we get into our recommendations, we're going to talk about some enrollment opportunities and challenges. And again, Dean is here and can speak to some of this. As I mentioned earlier, we had record applications for fall 2025 incoming. We are already seeing strong applications for fall 2026 incoming, which is exciting. We are, as you know, second year consecutively ranked as #1 public university, and we still have that designation as an R1 research university that was conferred on us 2 years ago now. We have new housing on the horizon for fall of 2027, so I think that's particularly exciting for the students coming in now because they see that we'll have a first dorm open in 2027. We are seeing more of a geographic reach of our students, and we're seeing shifting trends in the peers, so we know where students are going if they don't come to URI, so we're sort of seeing shifting trends in that. So those are real opportunities. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about challenges, which are things we've talked about a lot here. We have high loan rates, variable parent rates in the 12% range, changes in federal borrowing limits for parents. You've probably seen the news on that for professional programs, and then definitions around what the professional programs are. We're continue to see free programs, tuition freezes at other institutions, and increased inflation on many costs. We do have quite a few Pell students enrolled, but we have about $100 million always of unmet need. We'd love to meet all of families' need, but we can't always get there. And we do see that our average families have less than $30,000 saved for college. So that's challenging. If you look at the elasticity and change price of enrollment, we have assumptions that we make, and we built those into what our tuition recommendation increases later on in the presentation. I think we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that a little later in our meeting. Next slide, please. So our recommendation this year is very similar to last year, which is a 3.5% tuition increase for in-state and out-of-state students. Based on our model assumptions, this level of increase will optimize our resources to help support our operations and also keep URI's education accessible and limit potential enrollment declines. As always, I know Dean and the enrollment management team work so hard to make sure that we're paying attention to all of our strategic KPIs around accessibility and inclusive culture, and also powering the university of the future. Like, how are we making sure that we have enough money to pay the bills? So it's a real strategic discussion that takes a lot of data into account as we come to this recommendation. Similar to last year, we are still assuming that once we reach a 4% increase over year, we will see enrollment decreases, and you'll see that in the financial slides I present later. A few things just to remember: that enrollment decline assumptions apply to all student types, but they're based on different factors for in-state and out-of-state. Obviously, in-state students have different needs than out-of-state students. And while the percentage increases are the same across all types of students, the dollar amount impacts differ based on what the base tuition and fees is, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then again, for the purposes of our financial projections, every 0.5% of enrollment loss equates to a loss of $1.2 million in tuition net of financial aid. Okay, so before we get into the numbers, I just want to share with you, as I have in the past, the next slide, which is a comparison of our peer in-state tuition. So here we're looking at the essentially the New England flagship universities. So this is the sticker price for in-state cost of attendance. So if you remember, the total cost of attendance I mentioned earlier is tuition fees and standard housing and dining. I think a key takeaway here is that most of our peers are increasing their total cost of attendance. We're in Keeney blue, so we're second from the bottom. Now, this does not take into account financial aid, so this is really the sticker price, but ultimately, we're increasing at a much more regular rate, which I think we need to do to sort of get in line with where our peers are, but we're still towards the bottom of our New England peers. Next slide. So this just shows some scenarios for what we looked at for in-state. So similar to previous years, we looked at potential increases from 2.5% all the way to 5%, just to sort of analyze where we would land financially. Here at the top of the top half of the table shows you tuition rates and tuition and mandatory fees, and then total cost of attendance, which includes that housing and dining. And then the bottom just gives you those same categories, but change of numbers. So the green is where we are proposing an increase. That's the 3.5%. And then for reference, the upper right-hand corner is where we were last year. So last year, the total cost of attendance was $32,546. We're proposing $33,540, which would be a change in $994. So under that $1,000 mark, which I think is actually an important number for families. If you take into account housing and dining, it's about $604 if you don't take into account housing and dining. So that's our proposal for undergrad in-state. And then I have a similar set of slides for out-of-state. So the next slide shows you our peer comparison for out-of-state. Again, it's total cost of attendance. Again, we're in Keeney blue, so we're second from the bottom. You've seen increases here, but we still are not at the top of where our peers are. I know the board has expressed interest in kind of understanding where we are in the landscape, which is why we show these comparison charts. And then the next slide is a similar scenario slide around undergrad out of state. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see where we are right now for out of state, and you see our recommended 3.5% increase in green. It would ultimately end up with a total cost of attendance increase of $1,738 per student. If you don't take into account housing and dining, although most out-of-state students have to pay housing and dining, so it's less of an issue for out-of-state students. it's $1,348, $1,348 increase from last year. So those are our proposals for undergrad, in-state and out-of-state.
Can I ask a question, Abby, of Dean specifically? I've been hearing and seeing loud and clear that the New England schools are not necessarily our competitors as much anymore. Barring my own child who's heading south for school in the fall, there's lots of kids around that I've been talking to that are going to Southern schools or leaving New England altogether. And so I'm curious, as we're thinking about comparables and, tuition competitiveness, how are we thinking about the competition landscape for our students?
Dean, I'll let you jump in on that one.
Sure, thanks. So one of the reasons why we are certainly seeing that Southern aspect is that we have been pushing out of New England for the past several years, even before it became the popular thing to do. We knew about the enrollment cliff, we knew about New England. So no question that UConn and UMass still are our top two competitors, but we're getting into the James Madisons, the Virginia Techs, the Penn States, the Marylands, and the others. And so, Courtney, there's no question that when we push out to those competitors, that we start getting into kind of a different price differential in different aspects. So it is something that we are watching closely. It's also hard to compare sticker price versus net price because no one shares what their discount is for each individual student, right? And you have individual aid based on your enrollment goals. So, but I would like to say that the nice thing about us with our competitors is that we were pushing into their market very strongly. But you are right that it's something that we're keeping an eye on. So it's not just about the New England peers, but keeping an eye on some of those more Southern price points as well.
Yeah, and just to give context, my son's TCOA for out of state, not counting any aid or scholarships, is 43. And so, that's a significant difference in comparison to where we're at. So as I think about, the competitive nature, I mean, y'all don't have an aviation program, so you weren't getting Jacob anyway. But, I do think it's important because I'm kind of mesmerized, quite honestly, by the number of students that are saying, I'm going to Indiana, I'm going to Alabama, I'm going, and so thinking through, we want those students at URI, especially when we have programs that accommodate it. So, and I think, just the other thing, and I know I've shared this with Abby and the team, I am concerned about increase in pricing specifically for in-state students. We are seeing at United Way increased calls and concerns of parents and of families and meeting the demands of increased expenses to live and decrease in or relatively flat wages. And so, as we think about not only competitiveness, but specifically the ability for URI, for Rhode Island students to stay in Rhode Island, I'm concerned specifically about in-state. And I can happy because I've done a ton of research as a mom of a senior as to why I think we need to be very thoughtful about that. I do honor and understand and recognize the budget is as tight as it is, and the need for us, especially with what we're assuming for state appropriation, the need for us to recover those dollars in some way, shape, and form. And so I want to make sure I'm very clear about that, but I am concerned about students' ability to, see another increase and specifically consistent increase.
Is it Parlange? Do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Yeah, I wanted, Courtney, if I can, I think, because I reminded so many times, but let me remind it again, that since 1980, the state of Rhode Island has made the smallest increase in the state contribution to their flagship research university in the country. It's only been in the last 3 years that we've actually seen an increase greater or equal to the rate of inflation. And so there's a big difference between talking about those schools that happen to be in states which have experienced over the last 50 years or so, increases that are quite significant. So, that's something, I still think is incredibly important to keep in mind. So
Absolutely.
just mentioning as a reminder.
Yeah, no, I agree.
This is Amin. I don't know if this question is, Dean, are you responsible for keeping stats as to the placement of our students when they graduate, or is that another department for another committee?
So we have under my area a career center, the Career and Experiential Education with Meredith Armstrong, and we do keep those statistics on students who stay in Rhode Island, and placement, et cetera. That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, we're talking about tuition and fees, which is obviously important where we go with that, but I think also in the world we're living in right now with the importance on career and technical schools, that we better keep that at that and hopefully produce and place our students, because in the trades, we're seeing many, many kids coming into the trades that are not applying, although we are doing still terrific on the number of applicants that we receive based on the curriculums that we teach, keeping that stat in a good spot. So, yeah, we're going to be mindful of that.
If I can just add, we actually, when you walk through a lot of our buildings on tours and things, you will see, for instance, in engineering, 97% employed or in graduate school 6 months after graduation, average starting salaries. At our welcome days, we highlight that. We know it's a really important factor for families to see that cost benefit analysis, but also for students who might be thinking to go the non-traditional four-year route. So we do have those stats, and we continue to really make sure we promote them as a value proposition.
Okay, very good. Are there any other questions on tuition and fees? We take a vote on this in open session. Is that correct, Alyssa?
We'll vote on it after, in the action item section later in the meeting, is my understanding.
All right, okay. All right, hearing no additional questions on that. Next, Abby, is annual procurement update, and it's in our enclosures, so we'll talk about it.
I have a few more slides I'd like to just get through. I'll try to go through them quickly because I know we're up against time.
All right, go ahead.
But I wanted to make sure that you understand where we are with graduate enrollment. So we are really excited to have actually just announced a vice provost for the graduate school, a new leader in our graduate school. We are focusing on launching 4+1 initiatives and professional masters and growing our online programs. And it's really a priority for all of our academic colleges in alignment with the strategic plan. Some challenges are concerned over the global landscape. The majority of our graduate students are, the majority of our international students are graduate students. So as things get more challenging for them, that's something we're keeping an eye on. And also graduate housing, as you know, we're rebuilding Graduate Village, but we have a year to 2 years of uncertainty as we work to build that new graduate housing. So those are just the same kind of landscape of graduate enrollment. So if you go to the next slide, this is really a summary slide that talks to you about what the financial impact is of what we're proposing. So on the top half of the slide, you'll see what we're proposing, actual impact financially for our undergraduate, in-state and out-of-state at 3.5%. So that's a $4.1 million net of aid number. And then while we're not breaking down in great detail our graduate programs, professional masters and URI online, we're proposing to see a $3.3 million increase in all other, which are things like J-term and part-time students, $1 million increase. I'm going to talk a little bit more about graduate and online after this, but I just wanted to give you this picture that we would look at an $8.4 million net increase financially to the university. So just putting that in context, as you saw, our current service level, even just to sort of keep the trains running is much more than that. But this is something that we're trying to balance, always bringing revenue in to support the university operations and making sure that URI education is affordable to all. So I do want to brief the board on two things that we've talked to you about before. And I know the provost was here if there are questions, but we have made some changes internally for a few of our programs. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the first is differential charges. So we have done some analysis on what our peers are doing, what the market will bear, and how we handle program fees at the university. And we are taking a phased approach to implementing what we're calling differential charges. And differential charges are essentially charges to cover operational costs for specific higher cost programs that are higher to deliver, that will help us provide sustainable funding to support those programs. In many cases, these charges will replace existing program and course fees, so it's a little more transparent to the student that they're paying one differential charge as opposed to a program fee and multiple course fees. And this also aligns with what many of our peers have done for some of these higher cost programs. I'm going to share with you what we're proposing for the first year, but this would be considered the first phase. This was based on an analysis we did with Hanover, benchmarking on which programs would be ripe for a differential charge. They will be assessed to incoming cohorts. If they're not replacing the existing fee, they'll be assessed to incoming cohorts and future cohorts, not existing students. And these are authorized to be approved by the president, similar to how program fees and course fees were. So that's why we're bringing them to you for awareness, but not for approval. And if you go to the next slide, it'll be a little more clear how we're looking at these. So our approach is to look at 4 colleges: the College of Pharmacy, the College of Nursing, the College of Engineering, and the College of Business. And again, we did some benchmarking with Hanover and looking at our peers. And these are programs that are higher cost to deliver. The market can bear some additional differential charge for students. And in many cases, they already have program fees that we're replacing with differential charges. So the way you look at this table, you see pharmacy, nursing, engineering, and business in order. If you go to the right, you'll see FY26. If there's a number in the FY26 column, there's an existing program fee that will be replaced by a differential charge. If there's no number in the FY26 column, it's a new charge. So there was not a program fee that was being replaced. So you'll see that primarily in pharmacy and nursing and engineering undergraduate, there are existing program fees that we are going to be calling charges and increasing slightly. Engineering graduate and all the business programs that are listed there, these are new differential charges that we believe will help the programs be more successful by bringing more revenue in, and also are supported by peer analysis in the market. And so those will be assessed for incoming students only. So if you look to the right, the net new revenue that we're anticipating from FY26 is $1.8 million for this differential charge approach. This is our first phase. We will continue partner closely with the Provost's office to continue to look at if there are other programs that could have a differential charge in the future, but we wanted to make sure the board knew that we were taking this approach. Any questions here? There's a lot of information.
It looks like you implemented this for 2026. It's already been in the place, right?
No, 2027. So it would be for fall 2027. We're just sharing with you. And the net new revenue is built into the slide I shared with you, the total financial impact. So we're planning on implementing this for FY 2027. If you see a number in the FY 26 charge, it's an existing program fee. So for example, the PharmD program students already pay a program fee. We're moving to a charge. So it's a different model.
How many years have they been paying that? How many years passed prior to 2026?
I can go back and find that number, but historically, in the recent past, certainly. I can get you all of that detail if you're interested.
Are you suggesting this is the first time in many, many years, 2027, you're going to raise it for the first time?
No, it gets looked at periodically. The board doesn't see it because it's a program fee. So it's been treated as a fee that each program looks at to fund things like clinical placements, to fund equipment for specific clinical programs that need it. So students have already been paying program fees for many of these programs, but we're calling it a charge. It will go to the college. It will go to the college and it will be distributed more broadly to support more broad costs of administering the programs.
All right, this is not new.
This is new.
This is not, is it new or not?
Business, so if you see no number in the FY26 column, it's new. So engineering graduate and business undergrad, graduate and part-time MBA and full-time MBA, we are proposing a new charge for those programs, not replacing an existing fee.
Is that based on the demand for those programs, or based on the fact that people make more money when they're getting out of school and therefore it's a good investment, or what's?
That's certainly part of the analysis. So we look at the market, we look at what our peers are doing, we look at the costs. So business professors are expensive, engineering professors are expensive, right? So again, we worked with Hanover to kind of look at this in great detail. So it's cost of administering the activity. What are our peers doing? What does the market bear for students when they come out salary wise? So this has been a year in discussions with the provost office and enrollment management to come up with these numbers in close concert with the deans. So the deans know their programs the best. So they've taken the data and they've done this analysis and made these recommendations.
So in engineering, for instance, undergrad, somebody in the undergrad program is paying $1,500 respectively next year, right? To be an engineering school undergraduate, right? If I forget what it's going for equipment measurement, that's $1,500 somewhere, right? Is that discounted? Do they get financial aid for that? Because if they're on tuition, how does that 1,500? They paying the full boat?
Yeah, I'll let Dean speak to that. It is taken into consideration as the aid packages are looked at.
Yeah, so for those fees that you see, whether it be pharmacy, nursing, engineering, that is added to the student's total cost of attendance, and that is put into their financial aid formula.
So they can get aid for that. It's not 1,500 net. It's like to them, they'll be getting financial aid potentially on that 1,500.
There is need-based support for students who have need. That is correct.
Right.
So for 4 of the curriculums, we've been doing this for a long, long time. And Dean, based on the applicants, no issue, but we're gonna put it brand new for about 5 or 6 of them.
Yep.
So the timing will be that families will know about this before they make a commitment to the University of Rhode Island, and it will be built into their outgoing financial aid, cost of attendance, and packages that will go out over the next month or so. So our plan is to make sure that we do this in a very transparent way for our families, as we always do whenever we have increases or other expectations.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on this?
I'll just say it's pretty typical. I've seen it as we're doing our search too. So
Okay.
not surprised by it.
I have as well. And it looks like most of the new ones, aside from business, are at the grad level. And I've seen it in all my daughter's grad level programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is certainly, our peers have done this, and we think it's the right thing to support the programs to maximize their effectiveness.
Yeah.
So I do want to also brief on a proposed change to our URI online tiers. So the next slide, go through this quickly. Again, I really want to credit the provost and Dean Labuti and our new director of online for doing an in-depth analysis of our online tier tuition structure. Right now, our online programs have been pegged to various rates, not necessarily based on the programs, not necessarily based on the market. And so they've done an analysis of where we should have our online tuition and have come up with a proposal for 3 tiers. And if you look here, the rationale for that is that really affordability is the #1 factor influencing online graduate student choice. And we want to make sure we're competitive with our tuition structure. If we have one rate tuition across all of our programs, it really limits our ability to tap into those diverse markets. This also lets us compete strategically without devaluing some of our high demand programs, and it will help us support a long-term growth strategy. So you'll see in the next slide that we are proposing some of our programs to go down in tuition, but then we're proposing tiers with higher tuition, and we think that ultimately it'll allow all of our programs to grow. So our goal is to implement a tiered structure. We want to stay competitive. We want to build our programs. We want to build new programs, and we want to have flexibility for programs to move in the tiers based on what we see in the market. And just the small table down here just shows that we're looking at an increase of $2.1 million in our tuition tiers using these new tiers in 2027. And just, for context, our overall, all of our tuition and fees in FY26 was $420 million. So we're talking overall about $10 million in online revenue, which is a small percentage, but it's growing and it's part of our strategic plan. And we want to make sure we're tapping into that market. There's a big market out there. So this is one step to getting there. And then if you go to the next slide, it just outlines what the proposed tiers are. So the first is market competitive programs. This is one where we would bringing the tuition rates are by credit in the online world. So we'd be bringing our rate down from where it currently is. And an example of that would be Doctor of Education. Those are often on the lower end of tuition rates for an online program. The second one would be what we call our core academic programs. So that's an example here is Master of Engineering Management. They're signature URI programs that are strong value relative to peers, but we need to really be competitive in that market because we have a lot of other competition. Tier 3 would be more expensive, and those are specialized programs where URI is a standout. So for example, the Master of Oceanography, I think you all know that's one area that we're incredibly strong. And then we have a couple of programs that are very popular and very strong right now that we're recommending keeping at the rate where they are. So one of those is the Doctor of Nursing Practice, the Master of Library Information Science, and the Master of Public Administration. So they would kind of stay where they are right now. So this again is the result. This one slide doesn't show you all the work that's gone into this analysis over the last 6 months since we've had our new director of online programs come in, and we would propose that these new tier rates would go into effect also in 27. We're working hard at that. There's a lot of system work that has to happen behind the scenes, but that is our goal to have them in place for FY27. Any questions there? Okay.
Again, I'll just reiterate, this is pretty similar. I teach in the online program at Northeastern. This is how we do it.
Thank you. Okay, that's the end of my tuition and fees deck.
Okay, Abby, before you get into procurement update, I just need to put on the record that Courtney and Mike have been a part of the meeting. So they are here. Thank you. Okay, annual procurement update.
Great. So this is on the annual calendar for procurement update, and I'm going to go through these slides again kind of quickly so we can make sure we get to our action items. I do want to recognize my AVP for strategic procurement, Tracy Angel, who's online here. She does an excellent job leading our purchasing office. So we have some exciting modernization efforts, I'll call them, in our purchasing office at URI that I wanted to give the board a brief update on. So if you go to the first slide. The first is that we did engage the National Association of College and University Business Officers in 2025 to come in and take a holistic look at our URI procurement office. Part of that was in preparation for potential transition to Workday, but also, as I'll speak to later, and many of you know, we do have a Board of Trustees legislation that we're seeking more independence for procurement from the state of Rhode Island. So we wanted NACUBA to help us look at that. We've also engaged our external auditors to do some audits on our purchase and travel card transactions and our procurement delegation from the state, just to make sure that we have ongoing data about how we're performing. We have increased some of our limited value purchase orders, which are department issued purchase orders, up from $5,000 to $10,000 to increase efficiency and department autonomy. We've been doing a lot of work to get ready for Workday, e-procurement, and then we've also hired an inaugural contract manager. URI has historically not had a contract management program, which has been very challenging. So we now have one person. It's an N of one. We hope to have a second when we have some freedom, hopefully on the FTE front, but really to modernize our contract management function. Right now, we have contracts kind of stored. We have a very tight signature policy, but we don't have a contract management system. And then, as I'll speak to later in the deck, we are seeking more independence from the state on procurement. So those are just some high-level updates. Next slide, please. So this is just to give the board a sense of the volume that we do every year. So we are one of the largest state agencies. So overall, we're issuing $128.7 million in purchase orders and over 9,000 in every year. This is FY25. We issue those through the central purchasing office at URI in conjunction with the state purchasing office. We also have departments issue those purchase orders, and then we do some through RoadieBuy. RoadieBuy is an e-procurement software, Jagger, that you may recall we began implementation of, and we use it for what we call punch-out catalog shopping for commodities. We ended up stopping the full implementation of Jagger when we decided to go to Workday, so we will be implementing full e-procurement in Workday, but we are using Jagger to do this punch-out shopping, which has been very successful. We also, through our Jagger system, can do online bidding, which is new. We used to only accept paper. So if you can imagine, I think people are excited that they can actually submit things electronically now. Next slide. So we do have a state delegation, just as a reminder. We conduct purchasing at our purchasing office at URI for anything under $1 million using state funds. We also do everything on our own under a Board of Trustees procurement regulation for non-state funds. So things like auxiliary, research, gift funds, any other non-state funds, we do all of that procurement on our side. So this is just to point out that under our delegation, we issued over $22 million in purchase orders compared to $128 million overall. The reason there's a big difference in that number is that the state does all our general obligation bonds. And those are big dollar numbers, all of our big construction projects. And as you know, we've had a lot of those going on in recent years, which is great. We also did 50 public bid solicitations on our Jagger software compared to 75 overall. So 25 of those were done on the state system. So we're doing a large volume of work under the state delegation and under our board regulations. Next slide, please. This is just to share for Jagger. These are our top 10 suppliers. This is just informational, not a surprise. Many of them are scientific companies or office supplies, but these are our staff can go in and they can use a catalog similar to just digital shopping online. For our suppliers, we have them already built in there. It's made it much easier to buy some of those day-to-day items. Next slide. So we are seeking some changes to the Board of Trustees procurement regulations that are going to the governance committee next week, I believe, or later this week. So there are changes in 3 areas. The first is threshold increases. So those Board of Trustees procurement regulations were first passed by the board in 2022 after the board was created. We haven't changed them since, but we are authorized to increase our purchasing thresholds by CPI per the regulations. We just haven't done that. So we're seeking to increase purchasing thresholds, which will give our staff and faculty more flexibility in what they're purchasing. We also are trying to reflect increases in federal procurement regulations. So things like research grant dollars, the feds have actually increased their thresholds for what you can purchase without quotes, without competition. And so we want to reflect that to make sure our researchers can be as efficient as possible. So those are some changes in the regulations. We also are updating our minority business-owned enterprises requirements. So when we passed the Board of Trustees regulations, we adopted the state's minority business-owned enterprise regulations and requirements in our regulations. Given the complicated landscape at the federal level, which is actively saying do not use MBE preference in contracting, we wanted to make sure that we gave ourselves as much flexibility under our Board of Trustees procurement regulations. So we've just changed the language to not reflect exactly what the state program is, and just to say that we will conduct procurement within applicable laws. And we're working very closely with our Office of General Counsel and Procurement about how we handle that, because we have competing state and federal mandates. And then finally, we just have some cleanup language. So again, this is going to governance, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned it here as part of our annual procurement update.
Yeah, Abby, I just want you to back up a little. Explain to the board, originally the position that we had when the board was created on procurement, but then we needed to get legislation to get a certain value. And what's the legislation which has now been filed in the legislature for 2027 to get us where we want to go?
Yeah, so I have a slide on that if you don't mind. My last slide is on that, so I'll speak to that in a minute. The next slide is just a table to kind of make sense of what I just shared with you, which is kind of what our thresholds are. When I say thresholds, it's what process we use to purchase things over or under whatever dollar value. So here, this is just reflecting that we're increasing some of those thresholds. Increasing thresholds allows us to be more nimble, allows us to be more effective, because if you have to get 3 quotes for something under $5,000, it gets very complicated. We obviously are a public university, so we need to be competitive. So we're always trying to balance how can we be competitive by getting the best value and allowing us to be competitive with our peers who are also seeking some of these same services. So this is just a table outlining that. The next slide talks about our Board of Trustees procurement regulations. So I mentioned earlier, and I know if you don't live and breathe this stuff like Tracy Angel does, it may be complicated to understand, but for all state-funded purchases, we operate under the state's Office of Purchases, state's Division of Purchases. We have a delegation for anything up to $1 million. So we do it for them for anything up to $1 million for anything under state funds. If you could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. For anything that's not state funds, we operate under our Board of Trustees procurement regulations, which the board passed in 2022, which very closely mirror the state regulations, but not entirely. For example, that MBE provision I just mentioned, for example, some of the thresholds are different under the Board of Trustees procurement regulations. And part of that is that we're defined as a public agency as opposed to a state agency when we're using non-state funds. What we are seeking through this procurement procurement legislation is to essentially operate independent of state procurement regulations and have independence to operate under Board of Trustees procurement regulations for all of our purchases. So instead of working with the state and using a delegation, we would operate under one set of regulations that are Board of Trustees regulations, which is outlined in the Board of Trustees bylaws, which state the Board of Trustees has oversight over procurement. The one exception to that would be GO bonds. GO bond funded projects would continue to be managed by the state, and we would partner with the office, the purchasing office at the state for those, partially because the state issues those bonds, pays the debt, and actually pays the bills themselves. But everything else would be under the Board of Trustees regulations. If this legislation is passed, we would come back to the board and we would refine the procurement regulations to address that independence, and we would bring it back to you probably in the fall for more updates, and we can talk about it a lot more then. But right now, we're essentially looking to be more independent, more nimble, and able to operate under one set of procurement regulations, since right now we operate under two.
Any questions?
Abby, is there anything that, let's say this passes, is there anything that the board would have to do to function differently so that we don't become part of the hurdles? Or like, how does the board have to operate any differently, one? And two, would we have to, is there any reporting that's required on decisions made back to the state?
So I think we would, if we are able to seek the independence we're hoping for, then this would be under the purview of the Board of Trustees. So we would want to have active conversations with you about reporting you'd be interested in. We do report to the state. We could do similar reporting to the board. The board won't necessarily have to act differently, although we would ask you to approve updated regulations, but there would be more responsibility of oversight for the board because all of our procurement would happen under the Board of Trustees regulations. The bigger impact is making sure that we have staff and knowledge to be able to do this. I feel very confident that we do. We have been doing an enormous amount of procurement under our Office of Procurement for a long time, and we're advisors to the state in many ways. We have a pretty diverse purchasing portfolio relative to some of the other agencies. So I think it's more of a managerial challenge for me, but that's part of the reason we brought Nakubo in to say, okay, if we get this independence, what do we need? What additional resources, what additional training? And that's something we're constantly talking about.
Great.
Okay, Margot, you good? A follow-up?
Yeah, no, I just think this is another really important step for a large institution that operates a large budget, a complex budget. I'm sure that there are really, significant efficiencies that can be translated into time and cost that this would alleviate, both from the state and the university, while still ensuring that the oversight process is as good, if not better, because you have a focused group watching it.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I absolutely agree on that. That's, I'm sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No, I said the same thing. I said I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, agreed. Emily, do we have this on the governance committee agenda? We should be mentioning it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
It is, and I will be there and Tracy will be there to answer questions that the governance committee may have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Abby, we put this in place on the first Abby, if you remember, we went to state, we fought hard, Tom, and to get that flexibility and to do what Margaret said, but have we ever been able to measure how much more efficient, these other regulations are just fine tuning we've already done, right? But one of the things, we had a lot of these invoices under 50, under 10, with a lot of people in procurement. Have we been able to go back and say, we have been more efficient? Because I haven't seen any numbers that suggest that. I don't know what's been the result of all this.
So I will say that the regulations that the board adopted were generally similar to the state regulations. And I think that was a conservative approach when the board was created. So I
But we
think,
went to the state to change some of those regulations. If you remember on these limits we talked, that was a specific thing we did.
so we drafted the regulations to serve as a public agency. We put in some flexibility where we were able, but in many ways we were conservative and we just adopted language of the state regulations. And I think that was the right move as the board was being created. So in terms of efficiency, Mike, I don't necessarily have numbers for you that operating under our own regulations is more efficient. I think what happens is we have more control. Right now, we have two sets of regulations, and so we have to always think about which regulations we're operating under. We have to go to the state for things that are on the state. We don't have to go to the state for things that are here. We can certainly do that, but right now, the regulations are largely similar. And so my goal is that if we get the procurement independence, we'll come back to the board and we'll make some more changes to reflect our ability with procurement independence to be more efficient. But we took a very conservative approach back in 2022. Tracy, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add, but.
Yeah, Mike, just to add on to that, for instance, the committee that you're on right now to research and find a new athletic director.
Yeah,
If we were doing that procurement, we could have moved a lot faster.
right.
We're good with that consultant, get the finish line. I'm not saying the state in the end doesn't get it right, but we could have moved more efficiently and
Right.
faster, and maybe somewhere down the line could also help us when we're going out to bid for some projects by moving faster on prices and so forth. And it's just the way to go at this point.
Well, I agree. Well, we did a little analysis that way. So many invoices under 10,000, 15,000, and we were trying to get that all be more efficient by a number of people by us taking control of those limits. Because in purchasing, the biggest cause of efficiency is limits on what you can do, and then the process of them that you said you have to embark upon to get approval. Just getting construction and any of the big projects, Abby, are always going to go through that process. So we were trying to clean up like the low value, high frequency purchase orders.
Yeah.
That was what the goal was when we talked to the other ad, but I've never seen any result as to whether that's been successful or not successful. I mean,
Yeah, I'm happy to, I can come back and share with the committee more data on like breaking down what we do versus what the state does. What I don't have is sort of a time series, which I think is
Right.
for like, what's the average time from beginning to end? We can certainly look at that. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, let me just ask you one question. Abby, when the state does the audit of the state of Rhode Island, including the University of Rhode Island, do we need to get, as one of the safeguards, our own auditor to come in on our own procurement, or the state will still continue to look at that through their audit agreement?
So our audit becomes part of the state audit. So we have our own external auditor that audits our financial statements, and then that goes to the state and they accept our audit. We do have a requirement to do an external audit of our procurement delegation, and we do that with our auditors. We bring them in to make sure that we're only doing procurement for things under our delegation that actually are under our delegation. So we do that, and those are constantly in process. But no, this shouldn't impact our overall financial statement audit process.
All right, okay. Any other questions on this? All right, I know this meeting was supposed to go to 10:30. Based on the agenda, what do you think, Abby? How long, if we did do the Rhode Island Health and Education Building and the delegation of property, land and property before we go into executive session? How long for everything?
My recommendation, given that we only have 7 minutes left and we do have a couple of action items, is if possible to maybe defer those to a future meeting. I think they're very self-explanatory in the documents. But I think having the executive session discussion and the 2 action items would be the best use of time.
All right, so we're gonna.
Yeah, that would-
Hello?
Yeah, this is Emily. Let's do that. And if we have any time at the end, we can go back to them or just move them to the next. Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna pass on D and pass on E, and next order of business is executive session. The chair would ask for a motion that we convene into executive session pursuant to Rhode Island General Laws 4246-5A7 for discussion of a proprietary enrollment model as noted on the posted agenda. Do I hear that as a motion?
Motion, Mike.
Okay, I hear a second.
Second,
Joe.
Maria.
Heard of, okay, motion and second. All in favor, say yes.
Yes. Yes.
Opposed,
Yes.
no. Any abstentions? The motion passes. The committee will now convene into executive session for the reasons specified. The executive session will last approximately 20 minutes, after which the committee will reconvene in open session. The live stream will be paused during the executive session, and we will resume once the executive session has ended and the committee reconvenes into open session. For all those participating via WebEx, please confirm by saying yes, that no other person is present and or able to hear the discussion at the remote location. Do I hear a yes from all?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think we now will start to move into executive session.
Okay, Armand, we're live. Armin, you're still on mute.
I did make the announcement to do that, huh? I'm the only guy that didn't listen. The committee is now convened into open session. The first order of business in open session is a motion to seal the executive session minutes. Do I hear that as a motion?
So
I'll move
moved,
that,
Maria.
Joe.
I heard a motion and I heard a second. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? No. Abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. We really got two action items now, right? The consideration of the proposed tuition and mandatory fee rate for FY 2027 and recommendation for approval to the URI Board of Trustees. Abby, anything you want to add?
No,
Okay. May I have a motion that the committee recommends that the board approve a tuition increase of 3.5% for in-state students and 3.5% from out-of-state students, and an increased fee rates as presented in the enclosure, representing a 2.9% increase in total fees. Is there anyone making that a motion?
So
Joe,
moved, Maria.
second, Joe.
Second? All right, I understand we had good discussions on this. I get it both ends. All in favor, say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Any abstentions? The motion carries. The bond reimbursement we did not do, right, Abby?
that's correct. I can speak to that.
So all we have is a motion to adjourn, correct?
No, I would like to do the bond. It's an action item and I can speak to it.
Okay, then let's hear it.
So we are seeking a approval from the Board of Trustees on a resolution allowing us to spend money on 2 infrastructure projects before a revenue bond is issued. As if you recall, the university has access to 2 types of bonds. One are general obligation bonds that are issued by the state and approved by the voters. The other are revenue bonds that are issued by URI, and we pay the debt service. We anticipate coming to the board for approval later this year for a revenue bond to support 2 projects. One is the 3rd phase of our utility infrastructure upgrades, and the second is a repaving and hardscape improvement bond. And before we do that, we are hoping to work on a portion of 2 of those projects this summer, because as you know, we try to get these infrastructure projects done in the summer when the students aren't here. So historically, URI has issued bonds and then spent the funds, although the IRS allows you to spend funds in advance of the bond issuance and then reimburse yourselves up to 18 months. Some of you may recall we did have an audit with the IRS, and part of that was that we didn't spend the bond funds fast enough for a variety of reasons. I won't go into that, but we are trying to change our process where we get projects started using university reserves and then issue the bond and reimburse ourselves within IRS regulations. So what we're seeking from the board is a resolution authorizing URI to spend funds for these 2 projects that will then be reimbursed when we issue the bond. Likely in the fall, we will come to the board seeking approval to issue the bond before that is issued, and then we would reimburse ourselves. So one of the projects has an existing Kushner. The other project has a Kushner that's under consideration by the legislature. So this resolution will be pending the issuance of the Kushner, which we hope will go through the legislation normally this session. So the total amount would be for $6 million, $6.01 million, which is the expected expenditures in FY26 before we issue the bond. That we would then reimburse ourselves. And again, university reserves would be the backstop for that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. This is a relatively new practice at URI, but this is something that's very common in infrastructure projects at other institutions.
On the discussion, I'll also note that Abby spent a long time with Fahid, the chair of the fund, and myself going over this concept. And when I call for the motion, this is able to be done pursuant to a official section of the Treasury regulations if you so desire as board members.
I mean, I think it's a good idea because you get ahead of these projects, so you don't get fall behind, but you gotta be relatively certain these things are gonna go forward. Like that there is the bond at the end of the day to fund the rest of the project, or else that's the only thing I've seen people where they get in trouble on this.
That's correct. So there is a certain amount of risk here. I will say that there's no obligation for us to spend the funds. However, the majority of the funds are for an infrastructure project to upgrade the Farmhouse steam line and extend Farmhouse Road, which is critical for our Memorial Union renovation. So we can't do the MU until we do that project, and we have strong institutional commitment to move forward with that project. So my intention is save any major financial issue that we will issue those revenue bonds in the fall to support that project, because it really is critical for us staying on track for then issuing bonds to support the Memorial Union. The second portion, the second project, the parking and paving is to replace parking at Flag Road that we're losing with the new dorm. So that's something that we plan on doing. But if we decide not to, we don't have to do it. This doesn't commit us to doing it. It just says that the board's comfortable with us moving forward and reimbursing ourselves should we choose to move forward with both of those projects this summer as planned.
Mike, you muted out.
Yeah, I understand. It's a good practice from, especially when escalations and projects, just, I've seen some where you get hung at the end. I just don't want to do that.
Well, Abby, we raised the same issue with you. You want to just give another round with that? Why these two, we feel pretty confident?
Yeah, so I feel confident that we will be successful in issuing the bonds. Our last, obviously it's a different project, but our P3 housing bond was in huge demand. We've had success issuing revenue bonds. I think we have a really good, strong story to tell. If the concern is around actually being able to issue the bond effectively, I feel confident that once the board approves us to issue the bonds, we'll be able to do that. I also, $6 million is a lot of money, but I do feel that the reserves we have at the university, if we run into some catastrophic, unintended, unanticipated reason why we can't issue those bonds, I do feel comfortable that we could put a plan in place to offset any loss of that level of reserves. And we wouldn't start anything till the summer, and we would issue the bond just a few months later. So I think we'll get even closer to when we spend the money to when the bond is issued. So we'll even have more certainty about the landscape. I don't anticipate anything catastrophic happening, but I feel comfortable that that level is not a level that would be incredibly problematic if for some reason something unexpected happens.
Great, thank you.
All right, Mike, good questions. Any other questions for discussion? Okay, may I have this motion that the committee recommend to the board that the university hereby declares its official intent pursuant to section 1.150-2 of the Treasury regulations to use proceeds of tax exempt bonds issued by the Rhode Island Health and Education Building Corporation to reimburse the university for capital expenditures in connection with the following projects. 1, utility infrastructure upgrades, phase 3, and 2, repaving and hardscape improvements, and prior to the issuance of such new bonds, if any, in the amount not greater than $6,910,000. This declaration does not bind the university to make any expenditure, incur any indebtedness for the new money projects, or to proceed with the new money projects. Do I hear that as a motion?
This is Courtney, so moved.
I hear a second.
Second, Maria.
Thank you both. All in favor, say yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Opposed, no. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. Last motion to adjourn. I hear that as a motion.
motion, Mike.
I hear a
Second,
second.
Courtney.
Thank you both. All in favor, say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Abstentions, none. Thank you all. Motion passes. Appreciate it. I know we went over, but good discussion. Abby, good job.